The reality, the practicality out there is there is resistance to carbon farming. One of the classic quotes I got a couple of weeks ago when I was in WA, where the bloke came up to me and said, "Mate, I've seen these fads before. I'll see if it hangs around." You know, they see the political uncertainty, the press gets a hold of it and say it's not happening, or we get a couple of shock jocks telling us that it's cold today, so therefore global warming isn't real. And they'll wait to see if it hangs around. Perhaps that's ambiguity, uncertainty, I'm not entirely sure which way that goes. But I certainly have a lot of resistance from landholders telling me that it's interesting, they want to know more about it, but they're not so sure if they're going to participate. So one of the challenges we need to get out there and is explain it in layman's terms to the landholders. The other thing that we have to do is, because, as I said, we're not really selling anything. I often say credibility is king when you're selling air. And when you're selling air, your systems actually need to be airtight. And what this does is increases the transaction costs. The reporting, the verification, the monitoring, all the little bits and pieces that go onto it, the little middlemen like myself that go in there and I'm trying to build the pipeline. And building the pipeline is actually a very difficult thing. I've got one end of the market that wants a list of 10 million tonnes, 5 million tonnes. They want it all delivered in one big hit. I've got thousands of landholders out there delivering 5 to 1,000 tonnes. I've got very different couplings at each end of the pipeline, and trying to build that pipeline is difficult, it's expensive, but ultimately I believe it'll be worthwhile. But you need to have systems. As I said, you can't actually put this over the scales at the silo. You can't check the protein content. You can't check any of that. What you can actually do is basically report on it and sell a series of digits in an electronic registry somewhere. So what you need to do is make sure that everything's watertight, or airtight, and the difficulty of that is it increases transaction costs. So how do we overcome these barriers in integrated carbon farming? If you're looking for answers, I'm sorry I don't have them today. Come back in a couple of years and I might be able to help you out, but we need to overcome them and integrate carbon farming. As I said, we need to allow landholders to see the benefits and understand the obligations. They can see through you very quickly. If you don't give landholders the actual full details about what their obligations are, what the risks are, what the management burden they're facing, they'll just walk away. They're not interested. They'll just see it as a scam, as a fad, or whatever it might be. But you've got to give them the warts and all approach. I'm often accused of not being a very good salesperson for carbon sequestration or forest farming. And the fact is, I'd rather come back to a landholder in 5 years' time and give them a pleasant surprise than come back in 5 years' time and give them a rude shock. So I think you've got to make sure that when you're actually dealing with the landholders that you understand all the obligations, you understand all the obligations and you understand all the benefits, and you present them in a factual and straightforward manner. The biggest one, though, is how do we manage those transaction costs? How do we manage the monitoring, the reporting and the verification? A lot of people see this as a cash cow for the services industry. Well, if you're not giving the landholders a decent return for changing their management practices because they're not a covered industry, they're not going to change. They'll just keep going. And it's, a lot of people say, well, it'll be good now because they've all got money. Everyone's making good money out of farming at the moment, so they'll all change. Well, to me, that's a barrier to change. Why would I change my practices? It's all working fine for me today. So we need to look at that and how do we manage those transaction costs. So just basically in summary, what I want to say is there is a huge gulf between the practicalities and the realities. There's a huge gulf between the way it's discussed at the higher levels of government, where policy's set, legislation's set, and what I actually have to say to the landholders and what I have to deliver to the landholders, just in the language. The carbon farming is going to take time to develop. As I said before, we're actually talking about changing ecosystem services and changing management practices that have been entrenched for generations. And I think anyone who's worked in farming and tried to change farmers' practices would understand it's not an easy task, and it's got to be demonstrated. In many cases, it's very chicken and egg. Once the first checks start rolling out, it's going to be a lot easier. But farmers say, well, show us the money, and we'll start changing our practices. The other thing is that we face is the big divide between the purchasers and the sellers. The political risk, the investment that required to overcome the needs long-term security. When I talk to the purchasers, they often say, listen, we don't know if carbon farming is going to be, or if the clean energy future is going to be here. We don't know if we're going to be a liable entity in 5 years' time. I'll tell you what I will do is I'll buy carbon for 5 years. And we go to the landholder and say, well, we plant some trees and we can sell the carbon out of it, but you'll have to keep them there for 100 years. So you've got one side of the argument saying, I'll do it for 5, and the other side saying, well, I'm required to do it for 100. And it's pretty hard to say to the landholder, don't worry, it'll be here. 5 years' time, we'll come back and buy some more. It's most likely what's going to happen. I mean, I've been doing it for 8 years and the carbon market hasn't gone away. They've tried to make it go away a couple of times, but it hasn't. So we need to have some of that long-term security to drive investment. And it's not cheap. All right? You're either talking about putting large facilities into feedlots or into piggeries, which can cost millions of dollars. You're talking about planting forests on a large scale, which takes a lot of time and effort, and you've got to do it at the right time. You get it wrong, the first 3 years are pretty difficult. You've got to make sure you get it up and get it growing. You've got to put in the management systems, the reporting systems, verification systems, and to make those investments, it needs that long-term security. When I started out in this game as a carbon broker, I wish someone had explained to me what a carbon broker was, because I've been broker and broker every single year. So what we need to do to overcome these barriers to participation is mainly the political risk. All right, if we want to improve this country, we have a golden opportunity at the moment to get that private investment into the landholders. The very people that supply landholders are the very organisations that are going to have a liable entity, and they have the opportunity to buy their carbon or their offsets directly off their consumers. So their customers are the ones that can create the offsets to sell them back to their own industry. So if you're going to be buying carbon credits, you can either buy it from the government or you can buy it from your landholders. And it's much better to have that money circulating within your own industry to ensure that they have the money to buy your product. Now, the challenge we face is how do we build those links? How do we develop those links? And how do we promote those links? There's a big difference between types of buyers in the carbon or clean energy future. Some of them have just waved the checkbook in my face and said, Ben, how much money to make this bloody thing go away? Others have said, well, yeah, we know we've got a liability, but what we want to do is hang our marketing campaign on this, so we need to know the story and we're prepared to pay more for it. So we've got a huge range of different requirements of the purchasers, and we've got a huge range of difference in the range of the abilities of landholders to deliver and willingness to participate. Mainly, we have to have a look at the information gaps, and there is some money out there at the moment for the Extension and Outreach program, where we can fund people to go out and talk to landholders and try to explain this to them. The big issue is, it's pretty easy to preach to the converted. It's pretty easy to go to a landholder or a land care meeting or something like that with a catchment management authority. You get your people there, they're interested, you can talk to them, it's all very friendly. The challenge is to get into the field days where you're getting the non-engaged audiences. It's to go to the agronomists and the other organisations where you can actually go out and speak to people who aren't currently engaged. And how we deliver the message. It's not necessarily through your regional land care facilitator or your local greenie. It's actually through the agronomist who can see the environmental and the long-term production benefits and the financial benefits, and getting the message delivered from a position of trust. And I think that's something we need to really overcome, and we also need to build systems to develop the transaction costs. And that finishes me up. Thank you.